The candles were still flickering on my birthday cake when my sister stood up, raised her champagne glass, and smiled that sweet, innocent smile I'd learned to fear. "I have an announcement," she said, her voice carrying across the crowded restaurant. "Marcus and I are having a baby. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss." The room fell silent. Not the good kind of silence, the kind that comes before applause or happy tears. This was the silence that comes when everyone realizes they're witnessing a car crash in slow motion. Because Marcus wasn't just any guy. Marcus was my ex-fiancé, the man I'd planned to marry 6 months ago. The man who'd broken our engagement 3 weeks before the wedding, claiming he needed space to figure things out. Apparently, he'd figured it out just fine. My name is Sophia Chen, and I had just turned 27 at what was supposed to be my celebration dinner. I was working as a pediatric nurse at Children's Hospital of Denver, living alone in a studio apartment I could barely afford after splitting all the wedding deposits I couldn't get refunded. I was finally starting to rebuild my life after the most humiliating breakup of my existence, and my sister had just detonated it all over again. Growing up, Rachel had always been the golden child. 3 years younger, naturally blonde while I had to highlight my black hair every 6 weeks, effortlessly social while I buried myself in textbooks. She was the one who dated the quarterback, got crowned homecoming queen, and sailed through college on her parents' dime while I worked 2 jobs to pay for nursing school. Then I met Marcus Thompson at a hospital fundraiser 2 years ago. He was a software engineer, quiet and thoughtful, nothing like the flashy guys Rachel usually went for. He brought me coffee during my night shifts, listened to me talk about my patients, understood why I sometimes came home emotionally drained. For the first time in my life, I had something that was entirely mine. When Marcus proposed last Christmas, Rachel was the first person I called. She squealed appropriately, offered to help with wedding planning, even threw me an engagement party at her apartment. I should have known something was wrong when she insisted on inviting Marcus to all the planning sessions, when she started texting him directly about venue ideas. The breakup happened on a Tuesday. I'd just finished a particularly difficult shift. We'd lost a patient, a 7-year-old girl who'd been fighting leukemia for 2 years. I came home exhausted and heartbroken, needing Marcus's comfort more than I'd ever needed anything. Instead, I found him sitting on my couch with an expression I'd never seen before. "I can't do this anymore," he said, not even looking at me. "The wedding, the pressure, pretending everything's fine when it's not. I need to call it off." He left that night and never came back. I had to call the venue, the caterer, the photographer, the florist. I had to return my dress, cancel the honeymoon, explain to everyone why there would be no wedding. The deposit losses alone set me back 6 months of rent. Rachel was wonderful during those first weeks. She brought ice cream and wine, let me cry on her shoulder, helped me box up all the engagement gifts to return. She was the sister I'd always wanted her to be, supportive and present and genuinely caring. "He never deserved you anyway," she'd say, rubbing my back while I sobbed. "You're going to find someone so much better." What I didn't know was that she'd already found him for herself. The signs were there if I'd been paying attention. Rachel started going out more, being mysteriously busy when I needed her most. She'd get texts that made her smile in a way I hadn't seen since high school. When I asked who she was dating, she'd just shrug and say it was nothing serious. Then came the social media posts. Subtle at first, photos of her out to dinner with the back of a man's head visible, carefully cropped to hide his face. Pictures of hiking trails Marcus had taken me to, restaurants where we'd had date nights. When I mentioned the coincidences, she laughed them off. "Denver's not that big," she said. So when she suggested we celebrate my birthday at Panzano, the upscale Italian restaurant downtown, I said yes. When she offered to plan everything and invite everyone, I was grateful. I thought she was trying to help me reclaim my social life. The restaurant was perfect, the private dining room decorated with white flowers and gold balloons. My family was there, my parents, my grandmother, my aunts and uncles, college friends who'd driven in from other cities. Even some coworkers from the hospital had come. Rachel played the perfect hostess, making sure everyone had drinks, taking pictures, leading the happy birthday song. She looked radiant in a flowing blue dress, her skin glowing in a way that should have been my first clue. When the waiter brought out my cake, chocolate with raspberry filling, my favorite, she insisted on making a toast. "Before we celebrate Sophia's birthday," she said, her voice clear and carrying, "I have some news I've been dying to share with all of you." I felt a chill run down my spine. Something in her tone made every instinct scream that whatever came next would change everything. "Marcus and I are having a baby," she announced, placing her free hand on her still flat stomach. "We're due in January." The mathematics hit me immediately. January meant she was already 3 months along. 3 months meant she'd gotten pregnant in June, just 3 months after my wedding was supposed to happen. The room erupted in confused murmurs. I saw my Aunt Susan's face go white. My cousin Jenny actually dropped her fork. My parents looked like they'd been slapped. But Rachel just kept smiling, kept glowing, kept looking at me like this was the most natural thing in the world. That's when Marcus stepped out from behind the bar area, where he'd apparently been hiding. My Marcus, wearing the blue shirt I'd bought him for his birthday, looking nervous but determined. He walked over to Rachel, put his arm around her waist, and, for the first time since this nightmare began, looked directly at me. "Happy birthday, Sophia," he said, like this was normal. Like announcing his pregnancy with my sister at my birthday party was just another Tuesday evening. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't speak. I couldn't process how the two people I'd trusted most in the world had not only betrayed me, but had coordinated this moment, planned this humiliation, chosen my birthday as the stage for their revelation. "Aren't you going to congratulate us?" Rachel asked sweetly, tilting her head in that innocent way she'd perfected as a child whenever she broke something and wanted to avoid consequences. That's when I realized this wasn't just an announcement, this was a declaration of war, and I was completely unarmed. I excused myself to the bathroom, walking on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. In the mirror, I stared at my reflection. The red dress I'd chosen so carefully now felt like a costume for a role I no longer wanted to play. My mascara hadn't run. I hadn't cried. That surprised me. Instead, I felt hollow, like someone had reached inside my chest and scooped out everything vital. When I returned to the dining room, the atmosphere had shifted. Conversations were happening in hushed tones. My grandmother was staring at her untouched cake with a confused expression. Marcus and Rachel were sitting close together now, her hand resting on his arm in a gesture of ownership that made my stomach turn. My mother caught my eye and gave me a look that said, "Please don't make a scene." They wanted me to handle this gracefully, to smile and congratulate the happy couple and pretend this was normal family behavior. "Sophie," Rachel called out brightly as I sat back down. "We were just telling everyone about the baby shower plans. You'll help me plan it, won't you? Since you're so good at organizing events." The audacity was breathtaking. She wanted me to plan a baby shower for her pregnancy with my ex-fiancé. The same woman who'd helped me return wedding gifts now expected me to help her celebrate the relationship that had destroyed my engagement. "I'm sure you'll figure it out," I said quietly, picking up my fork to take a bite of cake I couldn't taste. "Oh, come on," she pressed, her voice taking on that wheedling tone she'd used as a child. "It'll be fun. We can do a theme. Maybe something with storks?" That's when it hit me. This wasn't just about the pregnancy. This wasn't even just about Marcus. This was about power. Rachel had always needed to be the center of attention, but for once in our adult lives, I'd had something she couldn't claim. She couldn't let that stand. The breakup hadn't been about Marcus needing space. It had been about Rachel needing him. And she'd gotten exactly what she wanted. My relationship, my fiancé, and now my birthday party as the stage for her victory lap. I thought about all the times she'd comforted me after the breakup. All the sisters' nights where she'd listened to me cry about losing Marcus. She'd known the entire time that she was the reason he left. She'd sat there, rubbing my back and telling me I deserved better, while secretly carrying his child. The conversations around the table continued, but I'd stopped listening. My aunt was asking about due dates. My parents were trying to navigate the social minefield Rachel had created by asking polite questions about wedding plans. Wedding plans. Of course they'd be getting married. "Actually," Rachel said, "we're thinking about an intimate ceremony next month, small and simple, since we want to be married before the baby comes." Maybe at that little chapel in Boulder? You know, the one you showed me from your Pinterest board? My blood turned to ice. That chapel. I'd found it during my wedding planning. I'd shown her the photos because I'd been excited about how perfect it would be. She'd even driven out there with me to see it in person, had stood next to me in the parking lot while I described my vision for walking down that aisle. Now she was going to marry my ex-fiancé there. I set down my fork. The sound of metal against china seemed unnaturally loud. Everyone looked at me, waiting for some response, some blessing for this insanity. I need to go, I said, standing up and reaching for my purse. But we haven't finished dinner, Rachel protested, and I haven't even told you about the nursery plans yet. Sophie, please don't leave, my mother said. Let's talk about this like adults. Like adults. As if there was an adult way to handle learning that your sister had been sleeping with your ex-fiancé while comforting you through your breakup. I'm tired, I said simply. Thank you for dinner. Rachel's face fell into a pout. You're really going to make this about you? This is supposed to be a happy moment. A happy moment. For who? I kissed my grandmother's cheek. She was the only innocent victim in this mess, and walked toward the exit. Behind me, I could hear Rachel's voice getting higher, more defensive. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. I don't understand why she's being so dramatic. We're in love. Isn't that what matters? Love? She called it love. Outside in the parking lot, I sat in my car for 20 minutes, staring at the restaurant's glowing windows. I could see my family inside, probably trying to salvage the evening, probably making excuses for Rachel's behavior. But sitting there in the darkness, something was crystallizing in my mind. This wasn't just a betrayal, it was a pattern. Rachel had always taken what she wanted, and everyone had always let her. My parents, my extended family, even me. We'd all enabled her behavior because it was easier than confronting her. Not anymore. For the first time since Marcus had broken our engagement, I felt something other than sadness or confusion. I felt clarity. Cold, sharp, absolute clarity. They thought I'd slink away quietly, just like I had after the breakup. They thought I'd accept this, adapt to this new reality where Rachel got everything and I got nothing. They had no idea who they were dealing with. Because the woman who'd fought her way through nursing school while working 2 jobs, who'd comforted grieving parents and saved children's lives, who'd rebuilt her entire existence after her engagement fell apart, that woman wasn't going to disappear quietly. I started my car and drove home, but for the first time in months, I wasn't going home to hide. I was going home to plan. The next morning, I called in sick to work for the first time in 2 years. Not because I was physically ill, but because I needed a clear head and uninterrupted time to think. I made coffee, opened my laptop, and started doing what I did best: methodical research and careful planning. First, I needed to understand the timeline. Rachel had said they were due in January, which meant she was about 3 months pregnant. That put conception sometime in late May or early June. Marcus had broken up with me on May 15th. The math was nauseating, but crystal clear. They'd been together while he was still engaged to me. I pulled up my phone records from that period, screenshots I'd never bothered to delete. There it was. Marcus texting me on May 10th, saying he had to work late, couldn't make dinner. On May 12th, another excuse about a client meeting running long. I cross-referenced those dates with Rachel's Instagram posts. May 10th, a mirror selfie captioned "Girls' Night Out" with location disabled. May 12th, a photo of expensive cocktails at the Crawford Hotel downtown. The same hotel where Marcus had taken me for our 6-month anniversary. I spent the morning combing through social media, bank statements, and old text messages like a detective building a case. What I found was a pattern of deception that went back months. Credit card charges at restaurants where I'd never been but Rachel had posted about. Marcus's car parked outside Rachel's apartment building, in the background of her neighbor's Instagram story from April, a full month before he'd claimed to have doubts about our relationship. But the real breakthrough came when I remembered something Rachel had said at dinner the night before. They were planning to use that little chapel in Boulder for their wedding, the one from my Pinterest board. I'd saved that chapel because it was perfect, intimate, affordable, and they only took bookings 6 months in advance. I called the chapel. After explaining I was checking on a potential booking conflict, the receptionist confirmed that a Rachel Chen had reserved the venue for September 15th. The booking had been made on March 22nd. March 22nd, I checked my calendar. That was the day Marcus had seemed distant during dinner, claiming he was stressed about work. That was 2 months before he'd broken up with me, 2 months before he'd claimed to have suddenly developed doubts about our future. They'd been planning this wedding before my engagement was even officially over. The receptionist mentioned something else interesting. The booking required a significant deposit, and Rachel had paid in cash. Cash meant no paper trail, but it also meant she'd needed to access a large amount of money quickly. Rachel worked part-time at a boutique and lived in an apartment our parents helped subsidize. Where had she gotten wedding venue money? I logged into my banking app and started scrolling through months of statements. There, a joint account Marcus and I had opened for wedding expenses. We'd each contributed $5,000 to cover deposits and payments. After the breakup, Marcus was supposed to transfer his half back to me since most vendors had non-refundable policies. He'd never transferred the money. I called the bank. According to their records, $3,200 had been withdrawn from the joint account on March 25th, 3 days after Rachel had booked the chapel. Marcus had taken money we'd saved for our wedding to pay for his wedding to my sister. My hands were shaking as I hung up the phone, but not from sadness anymore. This was rage, pure and focused. They hadn't just betrayed me, they'd stolen from me to fund their betrayal. I spent the afternoon creating a detailed timeline with screenshots, bank records, and receipts. Every lie, every deception, every moment they'd looked me in the eye and pretended to care, while planning their life together behind my back. The evidence painted a picture of calculated manipulation that went far beyond a simple affair. Then I started digging into their current situation. Marcus's LinkedIn showed he'd recently started a new job at a smaller tech company, a significant step down from his previous position. Rachel's social media was full of expensive purchases and restaurant visits that didn't match her income level. Designer maternity clothes, weekly spa appointments, dinners at places that cost more than her monthly salary. Someone was funding Rachel's lifestyle, and it wasn't her part-time retail job. I found the answer in Marcus's credit card statements. He'd added Rachel as an authorized user 3 months ago, right around the time she would have gotten pregnant. Since then, she'd been charging everything to his account: clothes, jewelry, a weekend trip to Aspen, even a $1,200 massage package. But here's what made it interesting. Marcus's new job paid significantly less than his old one. According to public salary data and his social media complaints about budget cuts at his new company, he was probably making about 40% less than before. Yet his spending had increased dramatically since Rachel entered the picture. I cross-referenced his address with property records. Marcus had been renting a 1-bedroom apartment downtown until last month when he'd moved in with Rachel. But Rachel's lease wasn't under her name. It was under our father's name, which meant Dad was not only subsidizing Rachel's lifestyle, but was now also housing Marcus. My family was literally paying for my ex-fiancé to live with my sister. The more I dug, the clearer it became that this wasn't just a love story gone wrong. This was financial fraud, emotional manipulation, and family betrayal wrapped up in a pregnancy announcement. Rachel had orchestrated everything: seducing Marcus, convincing him to leave me, getting pregnant to lock him down, and manipulating our family into supporting their relationship financially. By evening, I had 3 folders of evidence: financial fraud, timeline of deception, and family enablement. But I also had something else, a plan that would expose not just what they'd done, but who they really were. Because Rachel thought she'd won by taking my fiancé and announcing her pregnancy at my birthday. She thought she'd humiliated me into silence, just like she'd done our entire lives. She had no idea that this time I had receipts. Literally. The next morning, I walked into my bank with a folder full of documentation and a determination I'd never felt before. The fraud department manager, Mrs. Patricia Williams, listened intently as I explained the situation and presented my evidence. Joint account. Unauthorized withdrawals. Money taken for purposes that violated our original agreement. This is definitely actionable, she said, reviewing Marcus's withdrawal records. Since you're both account holders, technically he could access the funds, but using joint wedding funds for a different wedding could constitute conversion of assets. We'll freeze the account immediately and start a formal investigation. Within 2 hours, Marcus received a call from the bank's fraud department. Within 4 hours, he was calling me. Sophia, what the hell is going on? The bank froze our account and they're asking questions about wedding expenses. This is insane. I kept my voice calm, professional. Hi, Marcus. I'm simply recovering funds that were used inappropriately. The money was designated for our wedding. Using it for your wedding to my sister constitutes theft. You can't be serious. That money was stolen, I interrupted. Along with my trust, my relationship, and my family. But the money part? That's actually illegal. He hung up. 20 minutes later, Rachel was calling. Sophie, you need to stop this bank thing right now. Marcus is freaking out and this is affecting the baby. Do you want to hurt your own niece or nephew over money? The manipulation was textbook Rachel. Make it about the baby. Make me the villain. Avoid any accountability for her actions. But I was done being manipulated. The only thing hurting that baby is having parents who are thieves and liars, I said calmly. The bank investigation will determine what happens next. While the bank handled the financial fraud, I made another call, this time to my landlord's office. I'd remembered something about Rachel's lease arrangement and wanted to verify the details. What I discovered was even more interesting than I'd expected. The apartment Rachel was living in wasn't just subsidized by our father. It was rent-controlled affordable housing designated for low-income individuals. Rachel had applied as a single mother with minimal income, which qualified her for the program. But she'd been living there with Marcus for months, and his income, combined with hers, put them well over the eligibility threshold. Housing fraud was a federal offense. I called the housing authority and filed a formal complaint, providing evidence of Marcus's residency, their combined income, and Rachel's false statements on her application. They opened an investigation within 48 hours. But I wasn't done. The chapel booking had been made with cash, which made me wonder about Rachel's other financial activities. I started looking into her recent purchases, the designer maternity clothes, the spa treatments, the expensive dinners. Most were charged to Marcus's credit card, but some had been paid for with cash. Cash that didn't match her reported income. I spent the afternoon calling businesses where Rachel had made recent purchases. At the jewelry store where she'd bought an $800 necklace last month, the sales associate remembered her well. She paid cash and mentioned she was a personal shopper for wealthy clients, the woman told me. Said she got to keep some items as payment. Rachel had never mentioned being a personal shopper to our family. Her official job was part-time retail at a boutique downtown. But when I called the boutique, I learned something interesting. Rachel had been fired 3 weeks ago for stealing merchandise. She was unemployed, claiming income she didn't have, committing housing fraud, and living off my ex-fiance's credit cards while lying to everyone about her financial situation. By Thursday, the consequences were starting to cascade. The bank had completed their preliminary investigation and determined that Marcus owed me $3,200 plus fees and interest. The housing authority had scheduled an inspection of Rachel's apartment for the following week, and I'd filed reports with both the IRS and state tax authority about unreported income and potential tax fraud. Marcus called again Friday afternoon, this time panicked. Sophia, please, this has gone too far. Rachel's stressed, which isn't good for the baby. Can't we work this out privately? I'll pay back the money, whatever you want. The money was always mine, I replied. What I want is for people to face consequences for their actions. Come on, we're going to be family. Rachel's having my baby, your nephew or niece. Doesn't that mean anything to you? The audacity was breathtaking. They'd stolen from me, lied to me, humiliated me, and now they wanted me to protect them because we'd be family. Family doesn't steal from each other, I said. Family doesn't lie and manipulate and betray. You made your choice when you decided to build your relationship on the ruins of mine. Now you get to live with the consequences. That weekend, Rachel showed up at my apartment. She looked different, smaller somehow, less radiant. The pregnancy glow had been replaced by dark circles under her eyes and a desperate edge to her voice. Sophie, please stop this. The housing people are asking questions. Marcus might lose his job if the bank thing gets out, and I'm scared. I made mistakes, okay? I admit it. But I'm pregnant. This baby needs stability. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Then I remembered sitting at that birthday dinner, watching her smile while she destroyed what was left of my dignity. You should have thought about stability before you decided to steal my fiancé and my money, I said. Actions have consequences, Rachel. I'm not responsible for fixing the mess you created. She started crying then, the kind of manipulative tears she'd used since childhood to get out of trouble. Mom and Dad are so disappointed in me. Everyone's asking questions. My life is falling apart. Good, I said, and closed the door. Because for the first time in our relationship, Rachel was experiencing what it felt like to have her world destroyed by someone she trusted. And unlike me, she'd actually done something to deserve it. The investigation was just beginning, but already the perfect life she'd built on lies was crumbling. And I was just getting started. 3 weeks after filing the complaints, everything started falling into place in ways I hadn't even anticipated. The first call came from the hospital's Human Resources Department on a Tuesday morning. They'd received a nomination for me from Dr. Martinez, the head of pediatric oncology, for the hospital's annual Excellence in Patient Advocacy Award. Dr. Martinez mentioned your exceptional work with the Henderson family last month, the HR representative explained. How you stayed 12 hours past your shift to help coordinate their daughter's emergency surgery and worked with our financial aid department to ensure they could afford the treatment. The award comes with a $5,000 bonus and recognition at the annual gala. I'd completely forgotten about submitting that recommendation. Helping families navigate medical crises was just part of my job, but apparently Dr. Martinez had been paying attention to my efforts beyond normal duties. The recognition felt surreal. While my personal life had been exploding, my professional dedication had been noticed and valued. The same day, I received an email from Denver Children's Hospital Foundation asking if I'd be interested in joining their Young Professionals Board. They'd heard about my advocacy work and wanted someone with my experience in nursing and patient family support. The position came with networking opportunities, professional development funding, and a chance to influence hospital policy. For the first time in months, I felt like Sophia Chen, the accomplished pediatric nurse, not just the woman whose sister had stolen her fiancé. But the real vindication came that Friday. I was working a day shift when my phone buzzed with a call from Mrs. Williams at the bank. The investigation had been completed, and the results were more comprehensive than I'd expected. We've recovered the full $3,200 plus interest and fees, she said, but we also discovered additional irregularities. Mr. Thompson had been transferring money from the joint account to personal accounts over several months, not just the wedding venue payment. The total amount exceeds $7,000. $7,000. Marcus had been systematically draining our wedding fund for months, probably to finance his secret relationship with Rachel. The bank had evidence of transfers to pay for hotels, restaurants, jewelry, and other expenses that coincided with Rachel's social media posts about girls' trips and mysterious dates. The district attorney's office has been notified, Mrs. Williams continued. This level of systematic deception meets the threshold for felony theft. They'll be in touch about pressing charges. Meanwhile, the Housing Authority investigation had yielded its own results. Rachel and Marcus were being evicted from the rent control department within 30 days. They also owed back rent calculated at market rate for the months they'd lived there fraudulently, nearly $4,000. Additionally, Rachel was banned from applying for any subsidized housing in the county for 5 years. The tax investigations were still pending, but the preliminary findings weren't good for them either. Rachel owed back taxes on unreported income, and Marcus faced penalties for claiming false deductions related to their fraudulent living situation. But perhaps the most satisfying vindication came from an unexpected source. My coworker Jessica had been following the drama through our mutual friends and decided to do some investigating of her own. She discovered that Rachel had been telling people at her former job that she was engaged to a doctor and planning a destination wedding funded by her wealthy fiancé. Jessica posted about this on our hospital's private Facebook group, not mentioning names but describing a situation that sounded suspiciously familiar. The response was overwhelming. Nurses from other departments started sharing their own stories about family members who'd exploited their trust, partners who'd stolen from them, and the importance of standing up to manipulative people. Dr. Martinez himself commented, "Healthcare workers spend so much time caring for others that we sometimes forget to protect ourselves. It takes courage to demand accountability, even from family." The post went viral within our hospital network. Suddenly, I wasn't the dramatic sister who'd overreacted to a pregnancy announcement. I was the woman who'd stood up to fraud and manipulation, who'd refused to be a victim twice. My phone started ringing with messages from colleagues I barely knew, expressing support and sharing their own stories. Even some nurses from other hospitals reached out, having heard about the situation through mutual connections. The validation was overwhelming, but it also served a practical purpose. When Marcus's new employer started asking questions about the bank fraud investigation, multiple character witnesses from the medical community were ready to attest to my integrity and professionalism. Marcus, meanwhile, was struggling. His company had placed him on administrative leave pending the outcome of the criminal investigation. The tech industry in Denver was smaller than people realized, and word was getting around that he was involved in theft charges related to wedding funds. Professional reputation mattered in his field, and his was rapidly deteriorating. Rachel was faring even worse. Without Marcus's income, she couldn't afford basic living expenses. She'd moved back in with our parents, but even they were beginning to understand the extent of her deception. Dad was furious about being unwittingly involved in housing fraud. Mom was embarrassed by the questions from neighbors and family friends who'd heard about the investigations. The final piece of vindication came from the chapel in Boulder. When they learned that their venue had been booked with stolen funds, they canceled Rachel and Marcus's reservation and returned the deposit directly to me, since the bank had traced the money back to our joint account. I used that money to book a weekend retreat for myself at a spa in Aspen, the same place Rachel had bragged about visiting with her mystery man months earlier. But unlike her stolen getaway, mine was paid for with money I'd actually earned. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like justice wasn't just possible, it was happening. And I was ready for the final confrontation that would put this chapter behind me forever. The final confrontation came 6 months later, at a place that felt almost poetic in its irony. I was attending the Denver Children's Hospital Foundation Gala as a newly appointed board member, wearing a midnight blue dress that had cost more than Rachel's entire maternity wardrobe. The $5,000 award bonus had been nice, but the real transformation was deeper. I'd discovered a confidence I never knew I possessed. I was mingling with other board members when I spotted familiar faces across the crowded ballroom. My parents, dressed in their finest clothes, looked uncomfortable among the doctors and philanthropists. And there, standing near the back wall like she was trying to disappear, was Rachel. She was noticeably pregnant now, about 7 months along, wearing a black dress that looked like it came from a discount store. Gone was the glowing, radiant woman who'd announced her pregnancy at my birthday. This Rachel looked tired, anxious, and very much aware that she didn't belong in this room. But the most striking change was in Marcus, who stood beside her with the defeated posture of a man whose life had imploded. His company had terminated him 2 months ago, when the criminal charges were filed. The tech industry blacklist was real, and his reputation was toxic. He'd been working odd jobs, delivery driving, freelance coding work, that paid a fraction of his former salary. They hadn't seen me yet, but I could hear fragments of their whispered conversation with my parents. "Can't afford the hospital bills," Rachel was saying, her voice strained with stress. "Maybe we should move to Phoenix, start over," Marcus suggested desperately. "Your father and I can't keep supporting." Mom's voice was tight with frustration. I watched them for a moment, remembering the confident couple who'd hijacked my birthday to announce their perfect future. Now they looked like what they were. 2 people whose house of lies had collapsed, leaving them scrambling to build something real from the wreckage. Dr. Martinez approached my group with a warm smile. "Sophia, I'd like you to meet the Henderson family. They specifically requested to thank you tonight." The Hendersons, the family whose daughter I'd helped save during that exhausting 12-hour shift months ago, had donated $50,000 to the hospital in my honor. Their daughter Emma, now in remission, handed me a drawing she'd made of me in my nurse uniform, with "My Hero" written in purple crayon. The presentation was being photographed for the hospital newsletter. The flash caught my parents' attention across the room, and suddenly, we were making eye contact for the first time since the birthday disaster. I watched recognition dawn on their faces, followed by something that looked like pride mixed with shame. Their daughter, the one they'd always overlooked in favor of Rachel, was being honored at a prestigious medical gala while their golden child stood in the shadows, broke and desperate. After the presentation, my parents approached hesitantly. Dad looked older somehow, worn down by months of dealing with Rachel's problems and the financial strain of supporting her failed schemes. "Sophie," Mom said softly, "we saw the article in the paper about your award. We're proud of you." "Are you?" I asked calmly, accepting a glass of champagne from a passing server. "Because 6 months ago, you wanted me to plan her baby shower and pretend everything was normal." They exchanged uncomfortable glances. Rachel and Marcus had moved closer, clearly wanting to join the conversation but uncertain of their reception. "We didn't understand the full situation then," Dad said carefully. "We know now about the money, the apartment, everything. We should have listened to you." "You should have protected me," I corrected. "But you protected her instead, like you always do." Quote. Rachel stepped forward then, her hand resting on her swollen belly in a gesture that had once been triumphant but now seemed defensive. "Sophie, I know I hurt you. I know I made terrible choices. But this baby, your nephew, he's innocent in all this. Can't we find a way to move forward?" I looked at her for a long moment. The sister, who'd once seemed so powerful, so effortlessly successful, now looked fragile and desperate. The pregnancy that had been announced as a victory now seemed like another burden she couldn't afford. "You're right," I said finally. "The baby is innocent, and he deserves better than parents who build relationships on theft and lies." Marcus flinched. "Sophia, please, I know what I did was wrong. I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you if you'll let me. But Rachel and the baby need stability right now." "Then you should have thought about that before you stole from me to fund your affair," I replied evenly. "Stability isn't something you give someone else. It's something you build yourself through honest choices." The conversation was attracting attention from nearby guests. Several of my new board colleagues were watching with interest, and I realized this was exactly the kind of scene Rachel had always dreaded: public accountability for her private actions. "I can't undo what happened," I continued, my voice carrying clearly in the elegant ballroom. "But I also can't pretend it didn't happen just because it's convenient for you now. You made your choices. These are the consequences." I turned to my parents. "When you're ready to have a relationship based on honesty instead of enabling, call me. Until then, enjoy your evening." I walked away, leaving them standing there in their formal clothes, finally understanding what it felt like to be the ones left behind. Later that night, sitting in my new apartment, a beautiful one-bedroom with city views that I could afford thanks to my promotion and award money, I reflected on how completely my life had changed. The woman who'd sat frozen at that birthday dinner had been replaced by someone who commanded respect and demanded accountability. My phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Martinez. "The hospital board wants to discuss fast-tracking you for the head nurse position in pediatric oncology." "Interested?" I smiled and typed back, "Very interested." Because in the end, Rachel had done me a favor. By destroying the life I thought I wanted, she'd forced me to build the life I actually deserved. And unlike her stolen happiness, mine was built on a foundation that couldn't be shaken. The woman who'd once begged for scraps of recognition from her family now had a career that mattered, colleagues who respected her, and a future that belonged entirely to her. That was justice. Complete, satisfying, and absolutely final. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.